Governor Scott's stay-at-home, stay-safe order. I certainly support the governor in his effort. This is my assistant, Emmett Donovan, and Jack Donovan. And his order is to keep people in their homes in order to maintain social distance to stop the spread of this virus, and I fully support it. Questions have been raised about how is it going to be enforced. The best way to enforce these types of orders and the law, in my view, has always been to educate Vermonters. Vermonters want to do the right thing. Vermonters are smart, they're hardworking, they're law-abiding, they're caring, they want to help their neighbors. So let's educate people about what the order is and what the law is. And if we all do our part, we can get ahead of this virus. The question's been raised about, well, what type of workers or what type of businesses are deemed essential workers and those who are non-essential. And some questions have been raised about businesses that may be remaining open and may not be following the order. The governor's executive order, I think, does a pretty good job of explaining what types of businesses will remain open. And the executive order is obviously online. We'll post it on our website at ago.vermont.gov. But if you have a question, you can call us at 828-3171, 828-3171, or email us at ago.info@vermont.gov, ago.info@vermont.gov, and we will get you the answer as best we can. Let me talk about a few of the issues that we dealt with this week. Number one, we have requested that the Federal Education Department provide greater relief for student loans. We have asked the Department of Education to stop all collection actions against any student loan borrower who has defaulted and to refund their 2019 offset. As you may know or may not know, if you are delinquent on an account and you owe the federal government student loans, that refund can be kept, can be garnished, if you will. We've asked the Department of Education to refund any offset from 2019 taxes. What's critical right now is people have cash in their hand to pay their rent, to pay their mortgage, to keep their lights on, and to keep food on their table. Student loans should be far down the list. Let's make sure people are getting their money back. We made that demand to the Department of Education today. The other thing, I have asked to partner to enlist the help of Amazon, Facebook, Walmart, these large retailers that also provide online platforms for third-party sellers to combat price gouging. For example, there was a case on Craigslist where a 2-liter bottle of hand sanitizer was being listed for $250. That's criminal. We're not going to stand for that, and we want to shut that down. We need to work with Amazon. We need to work with Facebook. We need to work with Walmart and others who provide this online platform to have a rapid response to shut down these scam artists who are trying to price gouge everybody out of necessities. We won't stand for it. We're going to work with people to shut that down. I also want to encourage folks this is my assistant, Emmett Donovan. I also want to encourage my folks to report to my consumer assistance program any instances of what they deem to be price gouging here in Vermont. Call us at 1-800-649-2424, 1-800-649-2424. Let me tell you what price gouging is. Price gouging generally is any sort of inflation of a price or a good or service during a crisis. The reports we're getting have to do with toilet paper. Seem to be getting a lot of those reports. And the question for us under Vermont law is, does that constitute a unfair act? How do you define unfair in the law? Is it unethical? Is it oppressive? Does it shock the conscience? Obviously, we're reaching out to these retailers, asking the questions, and we always reserve the right to seek legal recourse for folks. The bottom line in a crisis is we're going to protect Vermonters. We're not going to let people get ripped off. Folks are not only concerned about their health, they're concerned about their financial well-being. And what's critical right now is that people have security as best we can provide it in terms of making sure they're not getting ripped off. The other issues that we raised this week, I've asked the federal government to marshal and to utilize all the resources in their power to produce and to ask the private sector to produce the necessary protective equipment for our healthcare workers and for our law enforcement and first responders. Our gratitude is not enough to our doctors and nurses right now. They need this protective equipment so they can stay safe, so they can do their job to protect us. We need, as I said earlier, folks have made an analogy about this COVID-19 crisis to war, and I'll leave that up to others to debate. But we need to marshal the resources, not only government, but of the private sector, to come together to make sure our nurses, our docs, our police officers, our firefighters, our other first responders have that protective equipment to make sure that they stay safe, because they're going to make sure that we're safe, and we need to fully support our healthcare workers. The other issue I want to talk about just briefly is there's been a lot of talk of social isolation and self-isolating during this time. And even in a crisis, we know this, that domestic violence doesn't go away. I want folks to know that if they are in an unsafe environment, that domestic violence shelters are open. Domestic violence hotlines are open as well, and Vermont law enforcement stands ready to assist you during this time. We will do our job. These cases will be prosecuted. The courts will hear these cases because these are a priority during this time. The Vermont Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-228-7395, 1-800-228-7395. As I said, the shelters are open, the hotlines are being staffed, and Vermont law enforcement stands ready to do its job to protect women and children during this time. We know that domestic violence does not end just because we're in the middle of this crisis. The other issue I want to talk about is some workplace guidance that we put out for employees and employers. It's on our website at ago.vermont.gov. Please go to it. There's a lot of questions out there about employee rights and employer rights during this crisis. It is a helpful guide. Email us with questions. We can direct you to the right place or answer your question if we're able to at ago.info@vermont.gov, ago.info@vermont.gov. So many questions about unemployment insurance. I don't know if I said this earlier. Of course, we were on the wrong channel to start, but that's what happens when you're doing this from your kitchen table. This federal stimulus package that was passed last night, I want to thank Senator Leahy and Senator Sanders and Representative Welch for their leadership on that. The Senate passed it last night. The House is expected to pass it tomorrow. This is a good thing. I think one of the most important things is the expansion of unemployment insurance for folks. We know these numbers are at a record high right now because of this crisis, not only nationally, but here in Vermont. And what the federal stimulus package does is expands that unemployment insurance that gives people an extra $600 a week in addition to the state maximum benefit. There's an additional $600 coming out of this federal legislation. We'll get something up on our website explaining that, but that's something that's critically important right now. When people are worried about putting food on the table, making their rent, paying their mortgage, keeping the lights on, we need to get money to Vermonters and Americans right now. That was a good action last night by the United States Senate. Confident the House will pass it as well, and it will be signed into law. we need to make sure that people can take care of the basics, which of course, as I said, is food, shelter, and heat and electricity. Let me take some questions. I think there is a question here. A question I got earlier was about a business who may not qualify as an essential business or essential workers during this crisis. The executive order is very clear. You can email this. We can try to answer these questions again from an enforcement perspective. This is about education to businesses and to workers right now about it who's essential. But the underlying policy is this: stay at home, socially distance, make sure we're doing all our parts collectively to get ahead of this virus. And we got to do it. The governor's executive order, I thought, was relatively clear, perhaps to a lawyer, in terms of the types of jobs that could continue. But email us at ago.info@vermont.gov if you have a question about this. We can get you the answer, and we can address those issues. I think we have another question.
No, it's just a comment. But this person wanted to know where to report a business that's.
Yeah, well, the question of where the question to where to report right now would be to your local law enforcement. So call your local police agency. That's not to say there's going to be some sort of civil infraction or a criminal infraction. I want to be very clear what the enforcement policy right now is in terms of the governor's executive order. The governor has said this, his commissioner of public safety has said it, and it's something that I certainly support, is to educate Vermonters right now about what the order is and to work with people to educate them about who's essential, who's not essential. Let's do that. Vermonters are a law-abiding, hardworking group of folks. They do the right thing. They're community members. They're caring about their neighbors. They're going to do the right thing. Let's educate people about what the law is. As I've always said, my philosophy, always going back since I was state's attorney, was the best way to enforce the law is to give people the opportunity to comply with it. Talk to your neighbors. Talk to folks. We get another question here.
Do the essential employers provide PPE, protection equipment?
Do the essential employers provide PPE, which is the personal protective equipment? Sure. I mean, look, the issue right now about hospitals is, do they have enough of what's called PPE, personal protection equipment, shields, masks, and whatnot? One of the issues we're concerned about, and getting back to price gouging, are folks trying to inflate the price of this equipment or perhaps selling defective equipment. If that's happening, we will prosecute it. I need to know if that's happening. Call my consumer assistance program, 1-800-649-2424. But to answer the question, do essential employers provide personal protective equipment? They should. If it's outside the hospital, that's a great question. I don't know that. Whether it is perhaps an advocate working with a survivor of domestic violence, that's a great question. I can get the answer to that. I think the overriding issue right now, to be blunt about it, is that there's not enough equipment. Again, I wrote a letter to President Trump earlier this week urging that the federal government utilize and marshal all the resources and all the power it has to produce more of this personal protective equipment, ventilators, masks, shields, that we need to come together and we need to have a collective effort to produce this. That's something I certainly support. Do we have another question?
No.
Let me talk more about the governor's stay at home, stay safe order. Again, I support it. I think it's needed. I think it's necessary. And I'm sure it was a difficult decision to make. In regards to who is essential and who is non-essential, I get a call today about whether or not all restaurants need to do curbside delivery. There was a call about folks going into a restaurant. Obviously, restaurants cannot serve people inside. The executive order talked about that curbside delivery should be utilized, quote, to the extent possible. Obviously, that's going to allow folks to go into take takeout. What I would urge those businesses to take every step possible to do curbside pickup. Again, we all have a role to play to make sure that we're all doing our job, which is to do social distance. Whether that is going in and getting something to eat for takeout, but if you are, let's do our best as best we can. Let's be creative and innovative and figure out how to do this curbside delivery. So those are the type of questions that certainly I was receiving today. More of those questions about who's essential, who's not essential. And we need to work through this. I know it is difficult for folks who are not able to work at home, who can't go to work, who are being furloughed, who are being laid off. Nobody obviously wants that result, but we have to do what we can as a state to get ahead of this virus. And right now, it is to stay at home and to practice social distance. The numbers in terms of from the Department of Health today are 158 people have tested positive for COVID-19. 2008 Vermonters have been tested, and of course, we have had 9 deaths. Obviously, those numbers continue to rise, which underscores the importance of the governor's order to stay at home and to practice social distance. But these are the issues that we're confronting. These are the issues that we will continue to address as we go forward. My overriding goal as Attorney General right now is to protect the public, to protect consumers, to advocate on behalf of Vermonters so they have the information they need in order to make the best informed decisions to best protect themselves, their family, and their livelihood, and to make sure whether it's asking the Department of Education to give people their money back in terms of offsetting a tax refund, whether it's working with companies like Amazon or Facebook to make sure Vermonters are not getting ripped off, if it's petitioning the federal government to utilize all its resources and to use all the power it has to marshal the private sector to produce more protective equipment for our nurses and for our docs and for our law enforcement and for our victim advocates, then let's do it. Let's come together as a country and as a state and do our own part. And for those who say, well, what can I do? We all have a role to play. They may be doing this, sitting at their kitchen table with their kids, holding a Facebook Live office hour event. So we all have a role to play. Let's do our part and let's take care of each other because that is the greatest value of our state. With that, I don't see any more questions. I don't know the best time to do this. We did it earlier at 3 o'clock, I think Tuesday. Jack's giving me the numbers. Obviously, we started at 5:30. We had a bit of a technical glitch there to start, but we figured it out. But I really want to do this as a way to update the public, to be a resource for folks, to give people reliable information, again, so they can answer the questions they need to for themselves and their family. Because the one thing that I perhaps can do right now is navigate government quickly and efficiently for Vermonters and get people the information they need. Use us as a resource. We're the biggest law firm in the state. I think we have 150 folks in my office. We want to work for you because that's exactly who we work for. We work for the people of Vermont. So use this as a resource. We'll go to bat for you. We'll do everything we can to protect you and your family. With that, have a good rest of your night and watch this space, as they say, to see more Facebook Live events here. And I promise we'll get the technology down and stay on the right channel. Have a good night. Thank you, Vermont.
Thank you, Vermonters.